Hello, all. Welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi, and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Hello all, welcome to episode 7 of Fire Code Tech. On this episode of Fire Code Tech, we're talking with Cathleen Childers. Kat is a fire protection engineer with formal education from the University of Maryland in fire protection engineering. Her specialty is in fire protection design, code consulting, and life safety. Kat has worked for several different fire protection and MEP consulting firms. Now she works in New York City providing fire protection design and consulting for healthcare and other types of occupancies. This interview focuses heavily on design and communication and coordination with other architects and engineering disciplines. Kat gives a high-level overview of a week in the life of a fire protection engineer and how one would go about designing a fire protection system. This interview with Kat has some great takeaways for professional development, so I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and follow Fire Code Tech on social media. Let's dive in. Hi Kat, how's it going today? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Gus. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, I just wanted to get started with your background and how you got into fire protection.
Sure. So I decided when I was in probably seventh grade that I wanted to be an engineer, but I had no idea what that meant. But I stuck with it. So when I was in high school, one of my guidance counselors recommended a program at the University of Maryland called Exploring Engineering for Women. So it's basically you go down and stay in the dorms as a high school student with about 20 other girls, and each day you spend in a different discipline. So that was actually the first time I met Dr. Milky. I was a junior in high school, and I loved it. I decided to go to the University of Maryland for engineering. I came in undecided, and shortly thereafter, I remembered the great day I spent in the fire protection department, and I switched to that department.
Very cool. Yeah, that's so neat that you got to be a part of a program that exposed you to engineering at a young age. Fire protection, even better. I always talk about how I had never really heard of fire protection until I got to the college that I was attending, and how I always wished there was more for getting people involved at the high school level. There's not a whole lot of that. So that's really cool that you got to be exposed to different types of engineering from a young age.
Yes, and I have certainly tried to give that back since then. So we'll probably get into it later, but I'm very involved with the Society of Fire Protection Engineers, both on the local level and on the international level. I'm actually the co-chair of the Emerging Professionals
Wow.
subgroup, which is, we're just trying to get younger engineers involved. So it's people kind of within the first 10 or 15 years of their career. 10 to 15 sounds long. It's generally 35 and under, but we don't have a hard cutoff. But so through that, we work with the different groups who reach out directly to the high schools, but then through the local chapter, we attend a high school job fair in Westchester County every year, and we've done a couple of STEM presentations at local high schools in New York City. So it's not easy to get young kids excited about engineering, but I think since I've been in high school, there's been a lot more push of, hey, if you're even a little bit interested, like, let's come and talk to you. I think we're trying to get better at keeping kids interested, but it's not easy.
For sure, I understand. Yeah, we that's really neat that you get involved in and like to give back and try to, get more students into fire protection. I think that fire protection is such a good field and has such good job opportunity, and just career development. I think that if more people knew about it, it could only lead to, the development of the field. The company I work with now does at a local high school that specializes in engineering. We'll do a talk for them like once a year. But other than that, it's we are trying to reach out, but it's hard to get in front of these high school students and whatnot and get them interested. I feel like I was like you, where I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but I just didn't really know what that looked like, or what even that really meant. And so that's kind of even part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, is because I didn't really know what fire protection engineers did even when I was in school. So, yeah, I just kind of like to talk about that and explore that. And that's some of the impetus behind me, getting into this podcast.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I am surprised that there wasn't already one. I know that there's a couple that are like sprinkler based, but I think this was a great idea.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel like there's room at the table for all different kinds of perspectives and for all different kinds of fire protection professionals. The industry is so varied and so wide. I know there's some podcasts from people who are in inspections or people who are in sprinklers. So I just wanted to talk about the engineers, talk about the code officials, talk about, just a different area of the spectrum. But I am only encouraging of all the other people getting after it, because I think that fire protection needs as much of a light that can be put on it as possible.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point with the, different industries, and my role with emerging professionals, First Society of Fire Protection Engineers, not kids, but young adults who are just leaving school. We kind of try and give them resources. So at the North American Conference for 2 years now, we've done an hour and a half speaker track. And so the first year we did a panel of four different engineers and what they do. So I was consulting. We had somebody on in insurance and somebody on in research. And so that was kind of our goal with that. And then last year we did kind of a 30 minutes from three different people of what their typical day is like. And so we had somebody who had just started his own consulting company, somebody at NFPA Research Foundation, and again, somebody insurance, and even me, who's been in the industry for 10 years, and I feel pretty confident with the choices I've made. It's always so interesting to hear what other people are doing with the same background and the same interests as me.
Yeah, I mean, they might have the same background and the same educational experience as you, and then, I've been talking with people now, and just I'm always surprised. There's always something that I didn't know about what they do, or what their job looks like, or the kind of problems they get to solve. So it's always interesting to talk to different people in the field.
Absolutely.
I wanted to circle back on your experience at the University of Maryland, and I just wanted to get a little bit more about your coursework and what you liked there.
Well, it was a long time ago for me. No, I loved it, and when you see people around the University of Maryland fire protection alumni remembers it very fondly and sticks close together. And I still every year, maybe even twice a year, go down for career fairs and networking events, and then I've had a summer intern from the University of Maryland. So I think they're doing just amazing things. Some of their intro classes, they have one where they have to essentially like design a fire protection system for a shoebox house. And I was like, okay, I mean, even I wouldn't know what to do with that. But they came up with this thing where, they have this material holding back baking soda, and then when it burned through, the baking soda fell into the shoebox. Like, it's very, like, yeah, and it's like, a silly, simple concept, but it's so interesting, and it's such a real life application, right? And so then when I'm explaining, clean agent system, she's like, oh, yeah, like we did that project. So I think, and the University of Maryland just a few years ago created a position for a professor of practice whose main directive is, okay, this is what you're learning, but this is how engineers who are working every day actually apply these things. Another really cool thing that the University of Maryland did, at least when I was there, was the capstone program. And so what they did is had the best professors in each department teach the entry level coursework. And so you got to, meet these really captivating professors who are really passionate about the industry and wanted nothing more than for every engineer to stay in engineering. And so I thought that was a really great idea, because if you have a bad first intro class, you might reconsider engineering.
Hmm.
So they did a great job with encouraging kids to keep at it.
That's so important. All it takes is one teacher who, sparks that passion in you, and you see that they really care and believe in what they're doing to change your whole life. And so, yeah, that's awesome stuff. And yeah, I
Yeah.
think that education in general has a hard time with tying things back into the real world. So I like that you're saying that the University of Maryland, does its best to tie education and the resources it has back into what this means in the context of real world engineering and fire protection. So that's pretty neat. I like that. I wonder if you would speak a little bit more about obtaining your PE designation and tell me a little bit about what that was like.
That was an interesting time. My advice for everyone, I guess, is to take the FE as soon as possible and the PE as soon as possible. You have to study, no matter what job you have. I don't think there's any person that I've talked to who said, I opened the guidebook and I knew about everything in there. So you definitely have to go back to the basics and kind of make sure you have all the building blocks. It's a little daunting to get started. I think the application process alone makes you wonder if you should be doing this, right? Because you have to record all of your work history and get your transcripts. And when you're 5 years out of school, you don't really remember how to study like that. So I did the online SFP prep class, and I was lucky enough to have somebody in my office at the time who was also studying. So for me, it was important that we had to do it together, right? I couldn't just, skip that lesson. Like, we sat together and we talked about it, and that was really helpful. The practice questions are limited. So yeah, it was a long couple months, and they do it in October. So you're kind of giving up your summer to study every night after a long day at work. It's tough, but once it's behind you, you never have to think about it again.
Yeah, that's true. It is a daunting process to start logging all your experience and filling out pages and pages of paperwork, and every state is different. So you have to, be looking at your states, sometimes your local amendments for your board of engineering, and it can be quite a lot. So I know what you're saying there. And yeah, the studying part, it's hard stuff. I coming home from work when your brain's already just been going at 100% all day, and studying again is not an easy thing to do.
It is not. Yeah, and since I've gone it, your local chapter of SFPE might or might not have a question writing session. So since I've gotten my PE, I've been involved in that through SFPE every year, and that process has made me really appreciate how much effort goes into creating that test and who's creating that test, right? So SFPE is coming out is asking their engineers and their volunteers to have these minimum 4-hour sessions where you just lock yourself in a room with all your books and think about, okay, what do I think an engineer should know? And it is, you just blank piece of paper, write this question, and you try and put references, and then that question goes to a different group that validates it, and then that goes to, the testing company, and then they do a practice test and a cut score where they bring in experts from every field and see if they can answer it. So it really is so important to our industry that the PE does mean something and has an impact. And there's a lot of people working to make sure that we continue to have that test. There's, our industry is so small that NCEES sometimes is like, are you guys sure you still need this? So it's hard for the people taking it. It's hard for the people creating it, but it's so important in the industry to have something that's recognizable through all disciplines. So thank you to everybody involved.
That's so interesting to hear you talk about the process. I never knew about how, people will go into a room and write questions and that sort of thing. So I find that infinitely interesting to hear about, how these questions are vetted and, produced because, yeah, I just passed my PE exam last October and it was the last paper exam. So
Yes,
I've had a lot of thoughts recently on how that's going to change and what the new standard is or what the new normal is for the PE exam. So I know there's been a big resurgence in PE questions again because we're trying to gear up for the online test. So it's pretty interesting stuff.
absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to get into your professional work, and yeah, I just wanted you to go over your career at a overview level, and yeah, just tell me about your career up till now.
Sure. So I graduated Maryland in 2010, and I, unlike a lot of people, I'm not from Maryland. So I grew up in Connecticut, about an hour north of New York City. So I guess the summer between sophomore and junior year, I, didn't want to work my normal high school job. Everybody said it's so easy to get internships, but all the connections they had were at, around Maryland and DC, and I was going home. So I Googled fire protection engineering in New York, and I came across this website, and I called them and I said, "Hi, I'm a student at University of Maryland. Do you guys need an intern?" And the guy was like, "How'd you get this number?" And I was like, "I don't know. I Googled it." And he's like, "Great. Like, come in." And so we talked for about 10 minutes. And he was like, "Okay, when are you back from school?" And I was like, "What?" So, yeah, I mean, that was my first attempt at getting a job in fire protection. And it's gone pretty much that smoothly ever since then. So I interned at that company, Hughes Associates, now Jensen Hughes, in 2008, and I had a couple other jobs between then. I worked so Hughes, which is straight consulting, and then I had another job at an MEP design firm. I thought the code consulting was cool, and I liked the variety, but when you're just starting out, you don't really appreciate that. So I really like design, and I thought I would give it, a shot at just design work. And I found that I didn't like that. I liked the variety. So I went back to consulting, and then I was with Jensen Hughes for about 4 years. And then I moved over to Cosentini Associates, which is a large MEP design firm in New York, Boston, and Chicago. But we have now about 15 to 17 fire protection engineers. So we have,
Wow,
yeah. So I think we have maybe 350 engineers and 15 fire protection engineers. It doesn't sound like a lot, but as you know, in the industry, 15 fire protection engineers in one spot
that's a lot.
is not nothing. Yeah. So most of them are up in Boston, and they're all, I think, mostly WPI grads, which has a similar thing as Maryland does, where people stay in Massachusetts around there. So that's great. So yeah, it's interesting, and I definitely still do some design work. We help the bigger design studios with some of the more intricate problems they have. We also have our own projects. So it's been really nice to be kind of at a bigger company that does the big heavy lifting engineering, and then have this expertise kind of off to the side. So my company in New York is one of the biggest and best MEP design firms. So we're on the coolest projects. And even if I'm not necessarily working on them, I can still talk to somebody about, hey, like, what are you guys doing on that? And they're like, well, the architect said this. And I'm like, I don't think that's right. So it's definitely like a very exciting place to be with the design studios and the collaboration, and that we're the new technology. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride, and I've seen some very cool things. And everybody who does not do fire protection, when they go places with me, are always surprised at the things that I have to look at.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. Yeah, no, I was blown away. I was not expecting you to say 15 fire protection engineers. That's a lot.
Yes. And that's just code consulting. We have sprinkler designers who, are plumbing and fire, but 15 licensed, I think most of us are licensed by now. FPEs, Maryland, WPI. Yeah.
My company is the company I work for. FSB is one of the biggest architecture and engineering firms in the state, and there's only like four fire protection people who do fire protection for my company, and that's not small either. I can only imagine the huge projects that you guys get into because, the company I work for gets in on some pretty cool jobs and really big jobs for the state. I mean, for Oklahoma, we've done a lot of neat jobs. So yeah, that's why I'm a little bit awestruck when you're like 15, and then I'm
Mm-hmm.
just thinking of, I know what that means for my instance, but yeah, I'm just thinking of, what kind of neat stuff you guys get to do. And as an engineer, it's always fun to get the biggest and the baddest problems. So yeah, that's pretty neat.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and another good point you had is the diversity of thought through being involved with other professionals in your field. 15 other engineers doesn't mean just more people. It means more people solving problems, more people being innovative, and more people having just good takes on the industry or lessons learned or all of that. So that's neat that you get to be in that group of people who are all solving big problems.
Yeah, it's really great. We have a couple of engineers who do the fire modeling, be it smoke control or cantilever fire analysis and egress modeling. And I know what that is, but I would never attempt to do that. So it's nice to, we get to see their reports and see the output and understand their process, but they've got it covered. And
For
then,
sure.
we have the people who specialize in design, people who do, just healthcare. And we have one guy who is our accessibility expert, which I have no interest in becoming an accessibility expert. So it's really nice to have a team that covers all the bases in fire protection.
So yeah, it sounds like you guys have different sectors and different specialties. That's pretty neat. So I think that's a good time to say. So, what is the area in fire protection that you specialize in or that you enjoy the most?
I have always really liked design. So, right now I've got a couple of design projects. For some reason, have always loved working in AutoCAD and now Revit. It just, they used to joke like, oh, like give this to Kat. She'd love to do that on a Friday, just like clean up notes pages. So I've got, some Revit projects. I've got one right now that I'm doing, the life safety drawings, some fire alarm design drawings, and some sprinkler drawings at like a very high level, kind of like 60% CD type detail. And that is very fun, right? Because you get to look at the whole building and get to really understand it from the egress to the suppression to the alarm and how it all works together. So I do really enjoy design, but I've also got a pretty good amount of experience in healthcare, which is kind of booming right now. And so we've got a couple of healthcare clients in New York who are, in preparation mode. So we're trying to, meet their needs as best as possible. And the great thing about working in healthcare is because, everybody in that industry kind of understands how essential being safe is, that those are the proactive owners, and those are the owners who come back and say, you saw this and I really want to fix it, and what do you think we should do? And there's always something going on in the healthcare sector, right? They figured out that this door is not functioning properly, and they need somebody to come in and look at all the doors, and they want to solve the problem and make sure everything is safe all the time. And that's a good industry to work in, where people care a lot about the service, the safety that you're providing. Whereas, when you're working in New York City with some developers, they're concerned about the cost. Well, okay, it's safer, but how much is that going to cost? We really don't find that in healthcare that we get questioned on things that are providing safety, which is great.
That's neat. I've never worked in healthcare, but that seems pretty intuitive that they're like to be proactive and they care about life safety. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, the my only experience that would probably be in the same vein as that is like working for the government or for working for Department of Defense. That's another situation where they understand life safety and they are not as likely to push back on preventative measures or good maintenance. But yeah, I'd also have plenty of experience like you're talking about where you're providing the code minimum standard and the level of life safety that is, code compliant, but nothing above and beyond. So yeah. And I like drafting and designing too. Yeah, I wanted to get back into, you talked a little about like consulting and designing, and I could tell that there was some difference in your mind about those two things. But yeah, I just wanted to. I can't tell if you meant like code consulting and life safety stuff is different than designing and drafting, or do you have any thoughts on that?
It feels that way. Yeah. So, sometimes if I'm on the project just to design the sprinklers, I kind of have to ignore some of the other stuff. Right. It's really great to be on for both, right? To understand how the building works and then design from there. But that's just not how we get brought onto projects a lot of the time.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, for us, it's like totally different service, right? So if we get hired as the code consultant, we'll put together a code compliance approach report and we'll be there to help the architect with wall ratings and egress and all that stuff. And we'll get brought on in the beginning of the project. If we're on for sprinkler design or fire alarm design, they send us the building that's already done and say, put the sprinklers in. So it is very different services. And in New York, it seems people don't always think that they need a code consultant.
Hmm.
So yes, I mean, some clients, and some architects are very knowledgeable on that stuff, and that they say, "Well, we don't need that." So yeah, I obviously the project where I have all three right now is the best. The best in that I can take the time from the beginning to understand what's required, why everything is there, and then design from that. But the code consulting projects are nice because you really are kind of involved in the decision making. And well, if you add that much retail, then you're going to have to upgrade the fire alarm system. And that kind of stuff is interesting versus, hey, here's 20,000 square feet of this, put the smoke detectors in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, maybe for, I don't know who all will listen to this, but maybe for somebody who's not as familiar with the construction industry, a lot of times the architect will produce the life safety plans, and it's kind of goes back and forth in the industry whether or not the fire protection engineer will have impact in the life safety plans. Definitely if there is a fire protection engineer on the set of drawings, a lot of times they will provide the fire alarm and fire suppression drawings for the construction documents. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that I feel like that we're trending right now towards more and more having the fire protection engineer involved with the life safety drawings. But yeah, I go back and forth between, whether I get to be involved with that or, not. It seems like when there's problems, I'm always involved with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, the architects who are sure that they always want a code consultant on every project have learned that lesson the hard way. And, with anything design related, it's always nice to have somebody else just look at your drawing, right? Did I get too far into this? Can I not see, the trees through the woods? Like, am I crazy for thinking this is fine? And, a lot of the time, somebody else doesn't have to be somebody with more experience than you, just a different set of eyes, big picture. It's always helpful to have somebody who does this day after day, look at it and just say, no, that looks great. Everything looks great. Good to go.
Yeah, a different perspective is always valuable, and these projects can be very long, and just providing construction documents can take months, and sometimes more than a year, or so depending on how big the project is and what the contract for review and whatnot looks like. So it's definitely a process that could use a set of eyes for review, because yeah, I've definitely been in the situation where you've been staring at a set of drawings for a week or two, and then somebody takes a look at it for 3 seconds and it's like, hey, this isn't right, and you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I've been looking at this one stair for a week. I didn't even realize there's a whole other one over there.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, definitely it helps to have second set of eyes. So we talked a little bit about one of the projects you're working on now, but yeah, I just wanted you to go into a little bit more about what a day in the life of a fire protection engineer might look like, or
So, I mean, as we kind of were chatting about earlier, we're all working from home now, so it's definitely not what it used to look like. But I have always enjoyed, maybe we'll talk about my typical week, getting out
sure.
of the office a little bit. So with the healthcare and some other stuff I've worked on, there's a lot of inspections that I have to do, which, if you're going 100% inspections, it's driving you crazy. But if you're in the office every single day for months, you're also going crazy. So in my 4 years at Cosentini, have gotten a good mix of inspection versus design. So we just wrapped up, well, we're kind of wrapping up a project where we were looking at fireproofing and fire stopping above the ceiling in a 1 million square foot building. So that was a lot of
Wow.
months of being out in the field, on a ladder with a flashlight. And that stuff is really interesting to me. And I think you need to have the full picture for that, right? So you're going up and you're looking at these things and you're noticing, one tiny square inch of an issue. But then, you have to remember the person that you're going to ultimately submit this report to, does he care or does he just need to know what needs to be fixed, right? So I think like the biggest thing is understanding the construction process as a whole, of like, I'm looking at this so that I can create a document that tells somebody else how to fix it. So yeah, the inspections, the report writing, I like when it's the full process and it makes sense to me, right? So, that was fireproofing, but it could be sprinkler design if it's an existing building. You got to come in, you got to somehow be able to express to somebody what's there, what they can reuse, what they have to remove, and what needs to change going into it. And a lot of times with the design, people are worried about the AHJ approval and this and that, which is all, you have to look at everything, right? You
Hmm.
don't just want to put things on a drawing so it gets approved. You want to put things on a drawing so that everybody who picks up that drawing understands what you saw and what you need it to look like at the end. So inspection, report writing, drawings, a lot of meetings when things don't go great or when they're going good. The collaboration on these projects is so important, right? Like when you're designing the system and you're, all just staring at your computer screen trying to figure out this valve room, you got to talk to the architect, right? Like, hey, can you make this room a little bigger? Is this absolutely it, right? So you can spend hours trying to solve a problem that might not be a problem if you had just picked up the phone and asked the architect if there was anything that they could change. So that part is fun when you have a good team who's all on board. Nice when you see the process work well.
Yeah, I think I said this before on the podcast, but you get into fire protection and you think that fire protection is going to be the hardest thing you do, but turns out that coordination and teamwork and communication end up being the things that are the hardest, and vary the most from project to project is the people in the team and the stakeholders. And I like what you said about knowing your audience with these projects. Every project's different, and who you're reporting to or what the end goal of the project is always different. So you have to know your audience when you're writing these reports and, making these engineering judgments, as well as knowing the technical for, why they shouldn't have the conduit or the sprinkler pipe in the rated wall without, protection. Interesting.
Yeah, and in healthcare and some of the government projects that I've had, I found that having a fire protection engineer on the owner or client side, you think it's going to make your life harder, but it often makes it so much easier to have somebody on the client side just say, "Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We absolutely need to make this change." You know, Sometimes when you're the only person in the room saying, you can't do that. And everyone's like, well, why?
Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice to have another person who understands where you're coming from, especially when they're on the client side.
Definitely. And having somebody who knows what they're doing on the client side is going to help you get the information for you to get your design going and get everything moving along the way it needs to be in the first place. And,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so if you're needing information about existing systems or, what they really want for deliverables, then you have somebody who, understands what's required, talking to you about what they want instead of part of the consulting and just engineering and architecture stuff is in general is narrowing down these nebulous thoughts that the owner might have about what they want or what they need, and kind of synthesizing that and giving them something that is going to make them happy at the end of the day and achieves what they're trying to get at. So, yeah, it's
Absolutely.
hard to do and definitely helps if you're talking to some people who know what's going on.
Yep.
I like getting into all this design stuff and life safety, obviously. It's great. Big fan of design, big fan of fire suppression and fire alarm layout, kind of like you are. And just, I don't do as much of the life safety stuff, but I like getting into all that.
Hmm.
It's good stuff. But so if you were gonna give like a breakdown of the methodology or like a high level overview of what it takes to or what it looks like to design a sprinkler system or a fire alarm system for a new building, how would you describe that?
Well, so you definitely need to talk to the architect about what they're doing in the building, right? So that helps you understand what you need in terms of hazard classification, if you need any specialized pre-action, special hazard. So understanding that would be number one. And then obviously the incoming water supply, how big the building is, do you need a fire pump, where can I put all of the backflow preventer and the riser control valves, and then something that people always forget, the drainage, and making sure everybody understands what you're going to ultimately need from the square footage
Hmm.
at the end. So I've got this project now where there's a big overhang and they don't know where to put the dry pipe valve, and
Hmm.
they're requiring the nitrogen generator. So it's a significant amount of square footage, and important to know that up front for the architects especially. And then so figuring out where you're going to put kind of the brains of the operation between the incoming and the floor control valve, and then the sprinklers, figure it out. It's a lot of 1 inch pipe. You should be able to fit it in. So
Mhm.
definitely you gotta nail down the incoming to the riser control valve, and then loosens up after that.
That makes sense. Yeah, those nitrogen generators are big, and it seems like it's a common thing that fire protection engineers are always trying to arm wrestle architects for space. And, usually we're in a mechanical room or, some sort of a fire alarm panels in an electrical room. And, unless you're in a really big building, you're probably not going to get your own space. And yeah, a lot of times these dry pipe systems, they're serving, they're ugly. People don't want to see them.
Yeah.
And so you're like, oh, yeah, we need a a 10 by 10 space or a 6 by 6 by 4 space or whatever in the corner near the front of your building where this overhang is going to be. Figure it out. The less pipe we got to use is the better.
Exactly. Yeah. And some of the you gotta welcome all the solutions, but some of the things that they say are like, no, we can't do that. I want to work with you, but we cannot do that.
Yeah, can we put your pipe in the column and then can we go underground with that pipe and then pop up somewhere else in the building? I'm like, no.
Nobody wants that. Stop.
You're not preserving the architectural arch by having me run my pipe in the column. We'll paint it black and it'll look fine.
It'll be fine. Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely have had those same struggles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. So the design of the system, if it was a empty box and nobody cared about the piping, it would be very easy to design a system. But keeping the other stakeholders in mind becomes the challenging part.
Again, that coordination and communication, and you know, you could just provide fire protection design and just plop it in a building, but everybody's going to be mad at you because you didn't coordinate with the electrical to get it powered. You didn't coordinate with the mechanical engineer to make sure you had all your duct detectors. You didn't coordinate with the architecture, and they had a nice ceiling that you didn't put cover plates in. You just put straight up sprinklers in. So there's all these stakeholders that need to be communicated with and have input from. And yeah, the fire protection can be the easy part a lot of times.
Yeah, I worked with a woman in the design studio. She just retired after I think 45 years, and I was kind of taking over a project for her. She's going on vacation, and we were sitting down with the electrical engineer to go over what valves needed to be monitored, and she could have done this with her eyes closed. She just pointed at every spot where she had a valve. And I was like, how can you do that? She's like, what do you mean, how can I do that? This is my design. I know where every valve is. And I was like, wow. She has a million projects going at once, and she somehow always knows where every valve is. And she's like, listen, if I didn't know, this coordination meeting would take 2 hours. But I can tell you in 5 minutes where every single valve in this building is, and then we can all go back to our desks. I was like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's always neat to have good mentors or good people in your professional career that have they're just strong in fire protection. Yeah, you're always like, man, I need to get on my game. You start
Yeah.
highlighting my plans and you know, but yeah, I know how you feel. It can be a daunting time to and that's not your only project. You probably got a bunch of other projects, and it's like, how am
Exactly.
I supposed to remember all this for all these projects? And
Yeah. And then by the time they go into construction, you haven't looked at it in
oh yeah.
a year, and it's like, yeah, I think I put that. I have no idea. So yeah, I'm always so impressed. Some people, when they design these systems, it goes right into their head and they never forget it, and it's very cool. I'm not quite there yet, but we'll see.
I wanted to transition a little bit into some professional development topics. It sounds like, from what we've already talked about, you have had some great experience in, promoting the field and being involved with SFPE. But yeah, I always like to get into some professional development stuff so that we can spread the word about what's good to get involved with in the field. But yeah, I know you talked a little bit about healthcare right now and trends in healthcare. This podcast probably won't come out for a while, but I imagine that all this coronavirus stuff will still have echoing effects for years to come. But yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit of what you thought might be a meaningful trend in the industry right now.
I think right now it's technology. Since we're all working from home, I think people are leaning on the technology more than ever. So like, between Skype and Microsoft Teams and Zoom, I care a lot about sustainability and, the paper recycling and all that. So I, for a long time, have used my iPad to survey, which is nice because you don't have to carry around a roll of drawings and you kind of fumble around with them. But B, now it's nice, we're running into issues where people are like, oh, I left that drawing in the office. I don't know what my note said. And, having something where all of your field notes are A, legible to anybody who reads them, but B, available all the time as long as you have your laptop. That's been great. So I think we're kind of, a lot of times people get wrapped up in, well, I have to get this done and I'm going to do it the easiest way. And now that we're all at home trying to, be just as efficient as we are in the office, we have to really rely on the technology and figuring out what the best way to record all this stuff is so that you can recall it easily down the road. So I've always thought it was important, but I think now everybody else is realizing how important it is.
For sure. Yeah. I can see that a lot of people, just in my life, or there are some people that I work with that are, getting more involved with technology than they ever have before, whether that be through new software or new, forms of communication. It's just, you're forced to because everybody's so, isolated right now. It's kind of neat, you see some people adopting new technology or moving forward with some of this stuff, and I think that it's all for the better, even though it's painful now. I'm not trying to none of the situation is for the better, but I'm just trying to say that the progression in technology use and technology literacy seems like a good thing for sure. So yeah, definitely I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I've been doing quite a bit of like coordination type work remotely, which, at first I was like, oh my gosh, that's going to be a disaster. But no, so, I share my screen in CAD and we go through and he says, pan up, move that over, and it's been
Hmm.
going it's been going great. And so, people are saying, I hope some of the use of technology sticks, right? If I had to go down to that person's office, it might take, an extra hour and a half. But, if we can just jump on this screen share for 20 minutes and solve that problem, we might cut down on a lot of coordination time in the future.
For sure, yeah. That's what I was saying to somebody the other day too. Is like some parts about this situation working remotely are not as efficient, but some parts about working remotely, like being in a meeting while you're also on your computer and able to access other resources, while you're in the meeting. While if you were to be in a meeting in person, there would be no like searching your computer for a document or a resource that you needed for the meeting like while you were in there.
Yeah.
So in some instances it's more productive,
Yeah.
for coordination or communication than just being physically in a meeting with somebody and then all you can do is just be there in the meeting.
Yeah. I hope some of that sticks because I think it has been going really well, and I think people normally would have fought against it are forced to do it. So here we are.
Yeah, I think some of it will stick. It'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. But yeah, I think there is going to be a new normal in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But yeah, so I wanted to also touch on what kind of fire protection resources that you would recommend to professionals. I know you've talked a lot about SFPE and your great experience at the University of Maryland. But yeah, I didn't know if you had any other tips or things that you would think would be good for professionals in our industry or in other industries in fire protection.
Yeah, I mean, I am a huge proponent of SFPE. I was the student chapter president at Maryland, and then when I graduated and moved up to New York, I joined right away, got on the executive board. So I was now president of the local chapter 2 years ago. And, it's a lot of people are like, what's the benefit? And it's tough because you don't see the benefit until you need it. So it's, I met somebody 5 years ago at a meeting. That's great. And now, something comes across my desk where they make that or they sell that product and I need to get this question answered. And so that's the benefit, knowing the people in your community who are answering these questions and, knowing them well enough that you can call them and get your question answered in 5 minutes is really important. And another thing that I've been involved with, New York City loosely follows IBC, but generally modifies it so much that, it is our own our own building code. So I'm actually on the technical committee for fire protection in reviewing and writing that new code. And those are connections that I made through SFE, where they're, hey, does anyone have time to join this committee? And it's been a very cool process to be a part of, kind of like we were talking about the PE, like the man behind the curtain, and seeing, the discussions that go into every single word that goes into that document has been so interesting. And to have, a voice on that committee, but also to just understand how they arrived at those decisions and all of that stuff, came about because I was involved in the local fire protection scene. Yeah.
That's neat that you get to be involved with the New York building code. Yeah, for people who don't know, the like places like New York and California effectively have their own version of the International Building Code, and you better know what's different about the International Building Code and the New York Building Code, or you're gonna have a bad time because a lot of times there are big differences. But yeah, I did a job in LaGuardia last year. It's still in progress, but yeah, working with the New York Building Code, and and since that the building we were working on was a 100-year-old building, it's or close to a 100-year-old building. It's an interesting situation working in New York for sure. But that's really neat about you being on the code council for that. Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that and what that looks like.
Yeah, so it's been more than a year now that we meet once a month for maybe 3 hours. But so I'm on the fire protection technical committee, and there are technical committees for everything. So there's plumbing and mechanical, and there's life safety and egress. So fire protection, we cover chapter 9, which is all the system stuff. And then, some stuff in chapters 4 and 5 and 7. So there's a fire suppression subcommittee, fire alarm subcommittee, and then smoke control and interior finishes. And, kind of the architects mostly handle the fire resistance rated construction, but we weigh in on a lot of that as well. So I'm on that third kind of smoke control and other one. And so the Department of Buildings has gone through, and we started with 2015 IBC, and they've kind of made their suggestions, and then we review. So every single word has to be unanimously agreed upon by the
Wow.
entire committee. Yeah. So they read it. Somebody who is suggesting the edit goes up and they read it, and then you discuss it. It's again similar to the P exam. To see what goes behind it is crazy. And so we have people from Department of Buildings, people from the fire department, architects, engineers, and all these people kind of getting together. And when I first started, it was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, this all seems fine. Somebody said, hey, I noticed 37 instances where high rise is high space rise, and it's supposed to be high dash rise. And I was like,
Oh
what?
my
Yeah.
gosh.
So it's
That's intense.
exactly, yeah. Like you don't realize how much detail goes into it until you're watching it happen in real time, and it's crazy. And so, somebody says, okay, we want this, and then the fire department says, well, none of our guys know how to use that, so that's pointless. It's like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense, right? We're not going to require building owners to put something new and costly in their building if the fire department is saying we don't need that. On the
Hmm.
opposite side, we have some people on, the owner side who are saying, you can't make us do this. And the fire department saying, we absolutely need that. So if you don't provide that, you can't open this building. So it's very interesting.
That's cool. That sounds like a really neat process to be in.
Yeah.
You named all my favorite chapters, so I'm down for all that.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good point that NSTA and SFE and all ICC, there's always volunteer opportunities. I know, especially SFE, and like there's volunteer opportunities. Go on their websites and say what's interesting to you, and if those committees are seeking volunteers, get involved.
That's a great tip. Get involved, make connections, join local organizations. You'd be surprised about the kind of people you're going to meet and the kind of great knowledge and just networking that you can have at some of these events. People are interested in helping you out, and fire protection's very close knit, so that's all great stuff.
Yeah.
So, got one last question for you, and I wanted to see. So, if you were to go back and talk to yourself when you're just getting back in the fire protection field, what is the one piece of advice that you would give yourself?
I don't know. I definitely stick with it. It'll be worth it. I mean, there was definitely times where I wasn't sure that this was the right thing, or that I was gonna ultimately be happy with this long term. But yeah, stick with it. It's worth it. And if there are things you don't like, you can still change those things. But there's so much that you can do in the fire protection industry and community that find the things that you enjoy and stick with them.
That's great. Well, awesome, Kat. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I want to be conscious of your time, but I really appreciate you coming on.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.